what I want to do now is we want to talk about the actual bill that's in the New York Legislature right now. For people who maybe aren't aware, we'll give a little background, just very short summary of the bill and some explanation for people who may not know. I know some of you on the call, on the workshop here, do know about the bill, but others watching may not. So let me just go into this brief history of the current bill and explanation so everyone is on the same page. The current bill, the Great Lakes and New York Waters Bill of Rights, is, if you want to look it up on the New York Legislature website, is Bill A5156. And how it came to be, the bill, in 2019, I have to back up a little. CELDF was helping Toledo, Ohio residents work on a local law, the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. And in 2019, it was placed on a ballot in Toledo as a charter amendment, and it was passed by the people. So it was the first law in the United States recognizing the rights of a specific ecosystem. And it got a lot of media attention because of that. One person who heard about the bill from all the media attention was Representative Patrick Burke in Buffalo, New York. He obviously liked the law and basically used it as a template and changed a few words and introduced it, a Lake Erie Bill of Rights, into the New York Legislature at that time. And we were totally unaware that he'd done this. Well, the Toledo law was challenged by a big ag corporate entity within 12 hours of the law passing. And within 1 year, the federal court had overturned the law. The Ohio legislature took it a step further, and a few months after that, passed wording in a budget bill that preempted rights of nature in Ohio, which basically stated that no other community in Ohio could even attempt to recognize the rights of nature anywhere in the state. Well, it was about this time that Representative Burke contacted CELDF, and he asked us to help him draft a Great Lakes Bill of Rights. Well, needless to say, I was pretty shocked and asked if he knew that the Toledo bill had been overturned. He said yes, but that's all the more reason he said we have to keep trying, and that protecting only one of the lakes really wasn't enough because he realized they're all interconnected, just like all of us who depend on the Great Lakes. And trust me when I say that this is not an everyday or even an every year occurrence for us at CELDF. But we were up for the challenge and we said, yep, we'll help you draft this first version of the Great Lakes Bill of Rights, which was introduced in 2021 or 2022. I can't exactly remember. And again, this was new for us. And I assume it's also not the way that most state level bills get introduced. I mean, usually it's either an industry lobbyist we know, or perhaps an issue specific NGO that drafts a version of a bill and then finds a sponsor to introduce it. Usually not a legislator seeing a local law passed in another state that was challenged and overturned by a federal court and then thinks, oh, this is a good bill to introduce into my state. But anyway, that's what happened. And there was no groundswell of community or grassroots behind this bill, that's what was different. And there was no one at CELDF who lives in New York. So this bill was introduced, and we did what we could to educate some folks in New York about the bill, about rights of nature. And slowly, this coalition of people began to take interest and come together. Many of you were on the call today, in the workshop today. And that's really inspiring for me and others at CELDF because it means you haven't given up or moved on to something else, which is really a challenge when you're doing the hard work of systemic change and movement building. So I want to give a big shout out to all of you who've stuck with this. That first version of the bill, as more people around the state began to hear about it and learn about it, started conversations which led to a lot of questions. Questions like, why does it only include the Great Lakes? What about the Hudson River? What about the Finger Lakes? Were Indigenous voices included in drafting this? And so it forced us to hear all this input, to think about these things, and then bring more people into the conversation. And so when the 2022-2024 session ended, there was an opportunity to draft a new version of the bill. We consulted with residents in different parts of the state, and we sought out Indigenous input. These conversations resulted in the bill that was introduced this past February, and it will be active through May of 2026. The point of this is that just like the waters of New York, the law and the language of the bill has evolved. The current bill includes all of the waters of New York, and if passed, would give all local communities in New York the authority to pass local laws protecting the waters in their communities at a higher or stronger level of protection than federal or state laws. So as long as their local laws are more protective. The bill also nullifies any permit or license given by the state, federal, or international government or agency that violates the rights of nature, the rights of the waters as recognized by the law and any local law. So many people are confused as to whether they should be working on the state law or locally in their community. And my response to that is both. The state law would legalize the local efforts and supports the local enforcement procedures because the state law is giving the local communities the authority to pass the laws with specific enforcement mechanisms. And so I just want to read a couple of parts from the bill. If you go to the enforcement section of the bill, which is 71-1947, there's a part in there that says the commissioner shall enforce the rights and prohibitions of this law, excepting for local laws enacted to adopt these rights locally, which shall be enforceable locally. So that's opening the door for local communities to come up with their own procedures and ways to enforce protecting the waters and nature in their community. It goes on and it also says the municipalities and counties of the state of New York shall possess legal authority to enact and enforce laws that protect their local ecosystems by asserting for them the same rights and other provisions of this law, including but not limited to regulations and prohibitions free from state preemption or challenge by the assertion of competing rights of corporations. And then it goes on and puts some, guardrails in place because it says you can't pass laws that take rights away from either the humans in the community or that diminishes protection. So laws like the Clean Water Act or Clean Air Act that are already in place. So you can't weaken those. As long as things are more protective, then you can create those procedures and laws and mechanisms locally, and you can enforce it locally. And this is also where some confusion comes in because everyone wants the state law to lay everything out from them as to how this will work or be implemented. I mean, we hear that all the time, but it's too vague. It doesn't say how this will work. But what it's doing is it's freeing, it's giving, if it would, this was passed at the state level, it recognizes the rights and it also is giving the enforcement powers to the local communities to create their laws and procedures locally to protect their waters and nature. And honestly, no two communities are alike. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. What might work for Buffalo might not work in Syracuse or Rochester. And as Camilla talked about, each community with a much greater understanding of their own ecosystem then has the right to pass laws that protect the health, safety, and future for both the human and non-human inhabitants of that community. And people also like to play the what if game, I call it, and they come up with all these possible scenarios as a way to negate the bill or the effort. And again, both Camilla and Sensoon both mentioned experimentation. We have to be clear that when we're forging a new path and creating a new system or structure, there's going to be the need for experimentation. Some ideas might work really well, others maybe not so well. So some communities can look to another community that's tried something and go, we can improve on that. I think of the civil rights movement and all the struggles and various ways that local communities attempted to implement equality, right? I mean, I live in a community, Cleveland, Ohio, had forced busing, and that was one attempt that was made to implement equality, right, in education. Affirmative action's another one. And so locally, different things were being tried and used and then shifted, and like I said, some things worked better in some places than others. And rights of nature should not be looked at any differently. And it will also need some experimentation to figure out what works best. It's long-term thinking and also being able to hold many ideas and connections at the same time. And a big part of this is about community building, bringing together community and relationship building, which is sometimes difficult. That's the difficult work.